The courtroom doors slammed open with a thunderous bang. Every head turned at once. Two armed court security officers rushed inside, speaking urgently into their radios. The judge frowned. The prosecutors stopped mid-sentence. Even the reporters froze, cameras raised in anticipation. "Lock every entrance," one officer ordered. "Nobody leaves this courtroom." Confused murmurs spread through the gallery. The Korean Mafia boss, Kang Min-jae, slowly lifted his head. His wrists were chained, his expensive suit wrinkled after months behind bars. The man once feared by every criminal syndicate in South Korea looked defeated for the first time in his life. "What is happening?" the judge demanded. Before anyone could answer, another line of security officers entered. Behind them came several officials pushing heavy steel cases sealed with government evidence tags. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. "What evidence is this?" the prosecutor asked, unable to hide his irritation. No one replied. Then she appeared. A tall young African woman stepped through the doorway, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. Her expression was calm, her movements confident. In one hand she carried a leather briefcase. Behind her, more officers wheeled in additional evidence containers. The entire courtroom fell silent. Kang Min-jae stared at her as if he had seen a ghost. His lips trembled. "Amina?" She looked directly at him. For a brief moment, the fearless lawyer disappeared, replaced by the little girl who had once clung to his hand while crossing busy Seoul streets. "I'm sorry I'm late. Father." Tears filled the old man's eyes. The prosecutor stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I object. This woman has no authorization to interrupt these proceedings." Amina calmly opened her briefcase and placed a thick document on the judge's bench. "My authorization was signed by the Supreme Court 2 hours ago." The judge examined the papers. His expression changed instantly. He looked toward the bailiff. "Seal the courtroom." A loud metallic click echoed as every exit was locked. Nobody understood what was happening. Nobody, except the man sitting quietly in the third row. His heartbeat quickened. Sweat rolled down his forehead, because he knew exactly what was inside those steel cases. And if those files were opened, his life was over. 15 years earlier, rain poured endlessly over the streets of Seoul. Cars sped through flooded roads, spraying muddy water onto cracked sidewalks where most people hurried past without looking down. Near an abandoned pedestrian bridge sat an 8-year-old African girl wrapped in an oversized hoodie that barely kept her warm. Her shoes were torn. Her hands trembled from hunger. Yet she refused to stretch them out to beg. Instead, she hugged a faded blue backpack tightly against her chest as though it contained something priceless. It was the only thing she had left. Inside were 2 worn photographs, a broken necklace, and a handwritten letter she couldn't read. She didn't know much Korean yet. She only knew one sentence. "My parents." Every stranger she asked simply walked away. Some ignored her. Others looked at her with suspicion. Children whispered while pointing. Foreigners were still uncommon in that neighborhood, and an African child alone on the streets attracted attention that rarely brought kindness. By sunset she hadn't eaten. A convenience store owner caught her staring through the window at warm rice balls arranged neatly on the shelf. "Go away," he snapped. She lowered her head and quietly walked off without saying a word. An hour later, she found a stray puppy shivering beneath a cardboard box. It was smaller than she was. Just as hungry. She reached into her pocket and pulled out half a piece of dry bread someone had thrown away earlier that afternoon. She looked at it. Then at the puppy. Without hesitation, she placed the bread in front of the animal. "There," she whispered softly. "You need it more." The puppy wagged its tail before eating. The little girl smiled despite her empty stomach. High above the street, inside the back seat of a black luxury sedan, Kang Min-jae watched everything through rain-covered windows. He had just survived another assassination attempt. One of his rival syndicates had planted explosives beneath his usual route. 3 of his bodyguards were dead. His white shirt still carried tiny drops of someone else's blood. His right-hand man, Choi Hyun-soo, noticed his silence. "Chairman?" Min-jae didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the girl. "Stop the car." The driver hesitated. "Sir?" I said stop. The convoy came to an immediate halt. 6 armed bodyguards stepped out first, scanning every direction before opening Min Jae's door. The little girl instinctively backed away. She had learned long ago that expensive cars usually meant trouble. Min Jae slowly approached. He crouched until they were eye level. What is your name? She hesitated. Amina. Where are your parents? She looked down. I don't know. Where do you live? She pointed toward the bridge. There. One of the bodyguards scoffed. Boss, she's probably another runaway. We should leave. Min Jae ignored him. When did you last eat? Amina stayed silent. Her stomach answered with a loud growl. One of the men chuckled. Min Jae shot him a cold glance. The laughter stopped immediately. He pulled out several bills and held them toward her. Buy yourself dinner. Amina stared at the money. Then she slowly shook her head. I can't. Why not? My mother said. She swallowed. Never take money you didn't earn. The bodyguards exchanged surprised looks. Most starving children would have grabbed the cash without thinking. She didn't even reach for it. Min Jae's curiosity deepened. Then let me buy you food. She looked into his eyes for several long seconds. Finally, she nodded. They entered a small restaurant nearby. Customers immediately recognized Kang Min Jae. Conversations stopped. The owner rushed over nervously. Chairman Kang, please, anything you want is on the house. Min Jae simply pointed toward Amina. Feed her first. Minutes later, steaming bowls covered the table. Amina stared at them in disbelief. She picked up her spoon, then stopped. Instead of eating, she carefully divided every dish into equal portions. Min Jae watched quietly. Why are you doing that? She smiled sadly. If I eat slowly, it will last longer. Something inside the feared mafia boss cracked. For years he had watched powerful men fight over billions of won without blinking. Yet watching one hungry little girl trying to make a single meal last broke through the walls around his heart. As she finally took her first bite, tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. She wasn't crying because the food tasted good. She was crying because someone had finally looked at her and seen a child instead of a problem. Min Jae looked away for a moment. Then he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He turned to Hyun-soo. Find out everything about this girl. Hyun-soo blinked. Chairman Fly. Min Jae's voice was calm, but final. Because tonight, she's not sleeping under that bridge again. As Amina continued eating, none of them noticed a man sitting in the far corner of the restaurant. He quietly snapped several photos with his phone. Then he smiled. Because he had just discovered something he could one day use against the most powerful mafia boss in Korea. And he intended to make that little girl the key to destroying Kang Min Jae's entire empire. Hyun-soo didn't sleep that night. Before sunrise, he had already dispatched trusted men across Seoul with one simple order. Find out everything about the girl. By noon, the reports began arriving. There wasn't much. Her name was Amina Okoye. She had arrived in South Korea with her parents nearly a year earlier after her father accepted a temporary engineering contract. 3 months later, both parents disappeared without a trace after leaving for what should have been a routine business meeting. No bodies had ever been found. No ransom note had ever surfaced. The police investigated briefly before quietly closing the case. With no close relatives in Korea and no one willing to take responsibility for a foreign child, Amina eventually slipped through the cracks of the system. She had survived alone ever since. Hyun-soo placed the file on Kang Min Jae's desk. It's tragic, Chairman, but there are thousands of stories like this. Min Jae flipped through the thin folder. Just 8 pages. 8 pages to summarize a child's entire life. He closed it. Prepare a room. Hyun-soo frowned. A room? In my house? Silence. Forgive me, but that's impossible. Why? The elders will never allow it. They don't have to. They'll see it as a weakness. Min Jae slowly stood. They've mistaken mercy for weakness before. Hyun-soo sighed. I'll prepare the room. That evening, Amina stood nervously outside the enormous mansion overlooking the Han River. She had never seen a house so large. The gates alone were taller than the bridge where she had been sleeping. She looked down at her dirty shoes. "I don't belong here." Min-jae heard her. "You didn't belong under that bridge either." She looked up. He extended his hand. "Come home." Slowly, very slowly, she took it. Inside, the staff stared openly. Whispers followed them down every hallway. "A child? She's African. Why would Chairman Kong bring her here? Has he lost his mind?" The housekeeper, Mrs. Han, forced a polite smile. "I'll prepare a bath." Amina froze. "A bath?" Mrs. Han nodded kindly. "You'll feel better." An hour later, Amina emerged wearing clean clothes for the first time in months. Her tightly curled hair had been gently washed and neatly braided. The bruises on her arms were finally visible. Mrs. Han gasped. "Who did this to you?" Amina quietly looked away. "Some boys." She refused to say more. That night, she was shown to a beautiful bedroom. The bed was larger than the entire space beneath the bridge where she used to sleep. She sat carefully on its edge. It was so soft that she immediately stood back up. She was afraid she might ruin it. When Mrs. Han returned 30 minutes later, she found Amina sleeping on the floor, curled up beside the bed, still hugging the old blue backpack. The next morning, the mansion's dining room hosted an emergency meeting. Around the table sat the 12 senior leaders of Kang Min-jae's organization. None of them looked pleased. An elderly man with silver hair slammed his fist onto the table. "This is unacceptable." Another nodded. "A mafia organization cannot become an orphanage." A third scoffed. "Today it's one child. Tomorrow the chairman's emotions will compromise every decision." Min-jae calmly sipped his tea. When everyone had finished complaining, he finally spoke. "Are you done?" Silence. He looked around the table. "How many of you joined me because you had nowhere else to go?" No one answered. "You." He pointed toward one executive. "You were sleeping in train stations." The man lowered his eyes. Another. "You survived by stealing food." Another. "You begged outside temples." Every man around the table had once been desperate. Min-jae's voice remained calm. "I gave each of you a chance." He stood. "So explain to me why she deserves less." Nobody had an answer, but resentment remained, especially in one man, Park Do-won. He smiled politely, yet inside, hatred began taking root. Weeks turned into months. Amina slowly adapted to life inside the mansion. She struggled with Korean grammar. She mispronounced words. Sometimes she mixed English with Korean without realizing it. Whenever she made mistakes, she became embarrassed. Min-jae never laughed. Instead, every evening after dinner, he would sit beside her with children's books. "You read first." She stumbled through nearly every sentence. Patiently, he corrected every word. Hyun. And again. And again. Months later, she read an entire page without stopping. She looked up proudly. "I did it." Min-jae smiled. Yes. It was the first genuine smile anyone in the house had ever seen from him. The staff stared in disbelief. Mrs. Han whispered, "I've worked here 18 years. I've never seen Chairman Kong smile like that." Life wasn't perfect. Outside the mansion, reality was different. On her first day at school, dozens of students stared. Some had never seen an African child before. Others openly laughed. One boy blocked her path. "Go back to your country." Another grabbed her notebook. "Can you even understand Korean?" Laughter erupted. Amina quietly picked up her books. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. That afternoon, Mrs. Han noticed scratches on her hands. "What happened?" "I fell." She lied. The next day, it happened again. And again. One afternoon, 3 older boys cornered her behind the school gym. "Your father is a gangster." "My father isn't a gangster." "Everyone says he is." "He adopted you because nobody else wanted you." The tallest boy shoved her. She fell hard against the pavement. Her blue backpack burst open. The old photographs scattered across the ground. One boy picked up a picture of her parents. "So these are the people who abandoned you?" Before he could tear it, a deep voice echoed behind them. Put it down. Every student froze. Kang Min-jae stood at the end of the walkway. No bodyguards. No weapons. Just him. The boys instantly recognized his face. Fear drained the color from theirs. The tallest quickly handed back the photograph with trembling hands. We were just joking. Min-jae walked over. He carefully brushed dust off Amina's photograph before handing it back to her. Then he looked at the boys. If you have the courage to insult a little girl, you should also have the courage to face her father. None of them could even speak. Their legs shook uncontrollably. Min-jae never raised his voice. Never threatened them. He simply turned around. Amina. She looked up. Let's go home. As they walked away, she quietly asked, Did you scare them? He looked ahead. No. What did you do? I reminded them. That strength is measured by who you protect. She never forgot those words. Years passed. The frightened little girl slowly became a confident young woman. She mastered Korean. She graduated at the top of her class. She developed a passion for justice after seeing how easily vulnerable people could be ignored. When university applications opened, she surprised everyone. I want to study law. Several executives laughed. A lawyer? That's ironic. The chairman's daughter wants to prosecute criminals. But Min-jae simply nodded. Then become the best lawyer Korea has ever seen. She smiled. I will. Watching quietly from across the room, Park Do-won clenched his fists beneath the table. Because while everyone else saw a daughter chasing her dreams, he saw something much more dangerous. A woman who, one day, might become intelligent enough to uncover every secret buried inside Kang Min-jae's empire. University transformed Amina in ways even Kang Min-jae hadn't anticipated. She didn't just study law. She lived it. While other students memorized legal theories to pass examinations, Amina spent evenings volunteering at legal aid clinics, helping immigrants, abandoned children, and elderly people who couldn't afford representation. She saw herself in every frightened face. Every forgotten person reminded her of the little girl beneath the bridge. One evening, after successfully helping an elderly woman recover her stolen pension, one of her professors stopped her outside the courtroom. Miss Okoye. She turned. You could work for the biggest law firms in Korea. I know. You could become wealthy. I know. So why spend your time helping people who can't even pay you? Amina smiled. Because someone once helped a little girl who had nothing. The professor nodded quietly. Never lose that part of yourself. At the mansion, life seemed peaceful. Too peaceful. Kang Min-jae had grown older. Gray strands had begun appearing in his hair. The scars from decades of violence reminded him every morning that no empire lasted forever. One evening, he invited Hyun-soo to the garden. They sat in silence, watching the sunset over Seoul. I've buried too many friends. Hyun-soo looked at him. And too many enemies. Min-jae sighed. I'm tired. Hyun-soo had never heard those words before. For 30 years, I built this organization. He paused. I thought power would bring peace. It didn't. I thought money would erase regret. It couldn't. He looked toward the mansion where Amina was studying through the library window. She deserves a different legacy. Hyun-soo understood immediately. You want out. I should have wanted out years ago. Over the following months, Kang Min-jae began quietly transforming the organization. Illegal gambling operations were shut down. Smuggling routes disappeared. Extortion rackets ended. Instead, he expanded legitimate businesses, construction, shipping, logistics, hotels, and technology investments. Many younger members welcomed the changes. But not everyone. Park Do-won watched millions disappear from the criminal network. To everyone else, it looked like reform. To him, it looked like surrender. One night, he secretly met with several senior captains inside an abandoned warehouse. You've all noticed the chairman changing. One captain nodded. He wants us to become businessmen. Another scoffed. We didn't risk our lives to wear suits in boardrooms. Park smiled. Our empire is becoming weak. So what do you suggest? Park leaned forward. If a king forgets how to rule, someone stronger replaces him. Silence. The idea was dangerous. But greed had a way of making dangerous ideas sound reasonable. Meanwhile, Amina graduated at the very top of her law school class. The ceremony hall erupted in applause as she accepted her degree. In the audience, Kang Min-jae clapped louder than anyone. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded her. Miss Okoye, what inspired you to study law? She smiled. When I was a child, I learned what it felt like to be invisible. The reporter asked, who changed your life? She looked toward Min-jae. My father. Camera flashes exploded. For a split second, Kang Min-jae forgot who he was. Not a mafia boss. Not an empire builder. Just a proud father. That night, the mansion hosted a celebration. Executives, business partners, politicians, and family friends filled the ballroom. Music echoed through the halls. Laughter filled the air. For the first time in years, hope felt real. Halfway through the evening, Amina walked onto the stage holding a microphone. I want to thank one person. The room grew quiet. She looked directly at Kang Min-jae. When I met my father, I had nothing. I couldn't speak the language. I didn't know where I belonged. She smiled through tears. He never asked me to become perfect. He only asked me to become kind. She walked off the stage. In front of hundreds of guests. She hugged him. The room applauded. Even hardened gang captains wiped away tears. Only one man remained expressionless. Park Do-won. Inside his jacket pocket, his phone vibrated. A single message appeared. Everything is ready. He quietly deleted it. 3 weeks later, everything began to collapse. At exactly 6:15 on a Monday morning, police vehicles surrounded every major company owned by Kang Min-jae. Officers flooded offices with search warrants. Computers were seized. Financial records confiscated. News helicopters circled overhead. Breaking news interrupted television broadcasts across the country. The National Prosecutor's Office has launched the largest organized crime investigation in South Korean history. Employees watched in disbelief. Share prices plummeted within hours. Social media exploded. Every news station carried the same headline. Kang Min-jae's empire under criminal investigation. Amina was attending an international legal conference in London when she saw the alert on her phone. Her smile vanished. She immediately called Hyun-soo. He answered on the first ring. Miss Amina. What happened? There was a long silence. They came with hundreds of officers. My father. They arrested him. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. No. They've frozen every company account. Who filed the charges? We don't know. What evidence do they have? Another silence. Too much. Back in Seoul, Kang Min-jae was escorted into the prosecutor's office in handcuffs. Reporters shouted from every direction. Chairman Kang, did you order the murders? What about the money laundering allegations? Are you guilty? He answered none of them. He simply kept walking. Hidden among the crowd, Park Do-won watched with satisfaction. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. The first round of evidence seemed overwhelming. Secret financial ledgers, witness statements, bank transfers, audio recordings, confidential meeting minutes. Everything painted Kang Min-jae as the mastermind of a criminal empire that had never truly changed. Even Hyun-soo looked shaken. Inside the detention center meeting room, he lowered his voice. Chairman. Min-jae looked up. I've never seen evidence like this. Neither have I. It looks. He struggled to finish. Real. Min-jae closed his eyes. Because it was real. Or at least, most of it was. Someone had mixed genuine documents from the organization's past with carefully crafted forgeries. It was brilliant. Almost impossible to detect. Only someone with intimate knowledge of the empire could have created such a case. There was only one conclusion. The traitor, Min-jae whispered, has been beside me for years. Thousands of miles away, Amina boarded the first flight back to Seoul. She stared out the airplane window as memories flooded her mind. The bridge. The rain. The first warm meal. The words he had spoken to frightened school bullies. Strength is measured by who you protect. She clenched her fists. No matter who did this, I will protect you now. But as the plane disappeared into the clouds, neither she nor Kang Min-jae knew that the conspiracy was far larger than a single betrayal. Waiting inside Seoul was a secret buried 15 years earlier. A secret connected not only to the empire's collapse, but to the mysterious disappearance of Amina's own parents. The moment Amina landed at Incheon International Airport, her phone began vibrating non-stop. 32 missed calls. Over 100 messages. Every major news outlet wanted an interview. Former classmates were asking if the rumors were true. Even international law firms had sent emails expressing concern. She ignored them all. There was only one call she made. Hyun-soo. He answered immediately. Miss Amina. I'm on my way. His voice sounded unusually strained. Be careful. She frowned. Why? There have already been 2 attempts to stop anyone from visiting the chairman. Her expression hardened. What happened? The first lawyer was involved in a suspicious traffic accident. The second suddenly withdrew from the case after receiving threats. Amina stopped walking. What kind of threats? They knew where his children went to school. Silence. Then she asked the question that had been haunting her since London. Do you trust everyone around you? Hyun-soo didn't answer. That silence told her everything. Instead of going directly to the detention center, Amina headed to Kang Group headquarters. The once bustling building looked like a ghost town. Government seals covered every entrance. Investigators carried boxes of files through the lobby. Employees stood outside crying. Some had worked there for over 20 years. They had no idea whether they would still have jobs by the end of the week. As Amina approached, several workers recognized her. Miss Amina. We're sorry. They're saying terrible things about the chairman. She looked at their exhausted faces. Has anyone been paid? They exchanged uneasy glances. One woman lowered her head. Our salaries have been frozen. Another man spoke quietly. My wife is due to give birth next month. I don't know how I'll pay the hospital. Amina looked back at the towering headquarters. This wasn't just about her father anymore. Thousands of innocent employees were paying the price for accusations that hadn't yet been proven. She made herself a promise. She wouldn't just clear Kang Min-jae's name. She would save every family depending on the empire he had spent decades rebuilding. That afternoon, she finally entered the detention center. Kang Min-jae sat behind thick reinforced glass. For the first time in 15 years. He looked old. Not weak. Not broken. Just tired. When he saw her, a faint smile appeared. You came. She picked up the phone on her side of the glass. You knew I would. He chuckled softly. I did. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Neither wanted the other to see the tears in their eyes. Finally, Amina broke the silence. You should have called me sooner. I wanted you to finish your conference. She stared at him in disbelief. Father. Your career mattered. So does your life. He smiled sadly. It seems I've made a mess of both. She leaned closer. Look at me. He raised his eyes. Did you do what they're accusing you of? His answer came without hesitation. No. Did you ever order the murders listed in the indictment? No. Did you hide money through those companies? No. Then I believe you. He closed his eyes. You didn't even ask to see the evidence. I don't need evidence to know the man who raised me. His voice cracked. They'll come after you next. They're welcome to try. A faint smile crossed his face. There you are. What? The stubborn little girl who refused my money. She smiled through tears. And the old man who still thinks he can protect everyone. Before the visit ended, Min-jae lowered his voice. There is something you need to know. She listened carefully. I changed. I know. No. He shook his head. You don't understand. There were things I did before you came into my life. Things I'll regret forever. She remained silent. I made enemies. Dangerous enemies. I thought ending the criminal operations would end the war. It didn't. He leaned even closer to the glass. The person behind this has been preparing for years. The guard announced, "Time's up." Before hanging up the phone, Min-jae said one final sentence. "Trust Hyun-soo. Trust no one else." That evening, Amina transformed one floor of Kong Group's legal office into a temporary investigation center. Whiteboards covered every wall. Photographs, financial charts, witness lists, phone records. By midnight, the room looked more like an intelligence command center than a law office. Hyun-soo entered carrying another stack of files. "I've gathered everything the prosecution disclosed." She barely looked up. "Anything strange?" "Several things." He placed a document in front of her. 3 witnesses claim they attended meetings on the same night. She studied the statements. They all describe different rooms. Exactly. Another file. The prosecution says these bank transfers happened at 9:17 p.m. She compared them with company records. Impossible. Why? The chairman was giving a televised charity speech at that exact time. Hyun-soo nodded. They're mixing truth with lies. Whoever built this case knew investigators would focus on the true evidence. So the false evidence would slip through. Amina's eyes narrowed. This wasn't done by a prosecutor. It was designed by someone who understands both organized crime and the legal system. Over the next several days, she barely slept. Coffee cups piled across her desk. She interviewed former employees, reviewed security footage, compared signatures, verified financial transactions one by one. Tiny inconsistencies slowly began appearing. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. Someone had carefully altered history. Not by inventing a completely false story, but by changing just enough details to make the truth look criminal. Late one night, Amina stared at a shipment log. Something felt wrong. She flipped through another file. Then another. Suddenly she stood. Hyun-soo. He looked up from across the room. "Yes. Bring me every shipping record from 15 years ago." He blinked. 15 years. Now. Within an hour, dusty archive boxes filled the office. She opened them one after another. Bills of lading, container numbers, harbor inspections, cargo manifests. She froze. Her breathing slowed. "What is it?" Hyun-soo asked. She held up a faded document. "This container." He examined it. "I don't understand." She pointed to the departure date. "The same week my parents disappeared." He frowned. "What does that mean?" She quietly removed the old photograph from her blue backpack, the same photograph she had carried since childhood. On the back was a handwritten date. It matched. Exactly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Hyun-soo whispered, "Do you think it's connected? I don't believe in coincidences anymore." The next morning, Amina requested access to the original police investigation into her parents' disappearance. The response arrived within hours. Access denied. Reason: records classified under national security. She stared at the letter in disbelief. "My parents were engineers." Hyun-soo looked equally confused. Why would their disappearance be classified? Before either of them could answer, one of the office windows shattered. Glass exploded across the room. Everyone instinctively ducked. A bullet embedded itself in the wall where Amina had been standing only seconds earlier. Silence. Then chaos. Security rushed into the office. Hyun-soo grabbed Amina's arm. "Get down." She looked toward the broken window. Across the street, a black motorcycle disappeared into traffic. Taped to the bullet was a small piece of paper. Hyun-soo carefully removed it. His face turned pale as he read the message. Amina took it from him. Only 6 words were written in neat black ink. "Stop digging, or join your parents." She folded the note slowly, then slipped it into her briefcase. Instead of fear, a quiet determination settled over her. Because whoever had sent that message had made one critical mistake. They had just confirmed that her parents' disappearance and the conspiracy against Kang Min-jae were part of the very same secret, and she had no intention of turning back. The death threat changed everything. Until that moment, Amina had been trying to prove Kang Min-jae's innocence. Now she was hunting the people who had stolen 15 years of her life. By sunrise, the legal office had become a fortress. Former military security specialists guarded every entrance. Digital forensic analysts examined seized hard drives. Retired accountants volunteered to trace suspicious transactions. No one entered without clearance. No document left the room without Amina's approval. As word spread that she was reopening old records, anonymous calls began pouring in. Some offered money. Others offered silence. A few offered death. She rejected every one of them. Across town, Park Do-won sat inside his private office overlooking the Han River. He swirled a glass of whiskey while reading the latest intelligence report. One of his men stood nearby. She survived. I know. The sniper missed. I know. The man hesitated. Should we try again? Park slowly set his glass down. No. The man looked confused. If she dies now, suspicion falls on us. Then what? Park smiled. We destroy her credibility. He slid a thick envelope across the desk. Inside were forged photographs, fake offshore account records, fabricated emails. Leak these to the media. The man smiled. They'll think she's helping her father hide money. No. Park leaned back in his chair. They'll think she's been part of the empire all along. By afternoon, every major news channel carried the same headline. Lawyer daughter of Mafia boss accused of secretly managing criminal assets. Reporters flooded the streets outside Kang Group. Comment sections exploded. Social media turned against her overnight. She's just like him. She's protecting a criminal. This whole family belongs in prison. Mrs. Han watched the television inside the mansion and quietly wiped away tears. They're lying. The elderly housekeeper reached for her phone. She called Amina immediately. Child. Amina answered with a tired voice. I'm fine. No, you're not. They're saying horrible things. I've seen. You should rest. I can't. Mrs. Han smiled sadly. You've become just like him. Amina paused. What do you mean? When everyone else runs away, you run toward the fire. Late that evening, Hyun-soo entered the investigation room carrying a battered cardboard box. I found this. What is it? The chairman's personal storage. It was hidden behind a false wall in the old warehouse. She carefully opened it. Inside were dozens of journals, old photographs, letters, cassette tapes, and one sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Kang Min-jae's handwriting, were the words, For Amina, if I am no longer able to explain everything myself. Her hands trembled. She slowly broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. My daughter, if you're reading this, then my greatest fear has probably come true. You have always believed I rescued you. The truth is, I failed your family long before I ever found you. Amina stopped reading. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Hyun-soo looked at her nervously. What does it say? She continued. 15 years ago, your father came to me. He wasn't my enemy. He was my friend. The room fell silent. He discovered evidence that several powerful businessmen, corrupt officials, and members of my own organization were trafficking military technology through legitimate shipping companies. He wanted to expose them. I promised to protect him. I was too late. Amina's vision blurred. She kept reading. The night your parents disappeared, I sent men to intercept the convoy transporting them. We arrived minutes after the attack. The vehicles were burning. Your parents were gone. We searched for months. I never found them. Tears rolled down her face. I knew nothing. Hyun-soo whispered. I swear to you. She nodded silently and continued. When I found you beneath that bridge, I recognized the necklace around your neck. It belonged to your mother. That was the moment I realized who you were. Hyun-soo covered his mouth. My God. The letter continued. I didn't adopt you out of pity. I adopted you because I owed your parents a debt I could never repay. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being my responsibility. You became my daughter. Amina finally lowered the letter. She couldn't stop crying. Not because he had hidden the truth, but because she finally understood why he had looked at her with such sadness the very first day they met. He hadn't simply seen a homeless child. He had seen the daughter of people he couldn't save. For several minutes, neither she nor Hyun-soo spoke. Finally, she folded the letter with great care. I'm getting him out. Hyun-soo nodded. No matter what. No. She looked directly at him. Not just because he's innocent. She placed the letter back inside the envelope, because he kept his promise. What promise? To give me a family. The next breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of the forensic analysts rushed into the room holding a recovered hard drive. We decrypted it. Everyone gathered around the monitor. Video footage appeared. A grainy warehouse. A secret meeting. The timestamp was nearly 16 years old. Several men stood around a shipping manifest. One face immediately caught Amina's attention. Park Do-won. He looked almost 20 years younger. Standing beside him was a government minister. Another man. A shipping executive. The image froze. Hyun-soo leaned closer. No. Amina whispered. Zoom in. The technician enlarged the corner of the screen. The barely visible was Kang Min-jae. But something was wrong. He wasn't leading the meeting. He was arguing. The audio crackled as technicians increased the volume. I'm ending this shipment. That was Min-jae's voice. Another man shouted back. You don't have that authority. Min-jae slammed his fist onto the table. I said no. Park Do-won's younger voice answered coldly. Then you'll regret it. The footage ended abruptly. The room erupted. This changes everything. It proves he opposed the operation. Hyun-soo smiled for the first time in weeks. But Amina remained quiet. What's wrong? She stared at the paused image. Look at Park. Everyone did. He isn't afraid. So, he threatened the chairman, like someone who already knew he couldn't be touched. Hyun-soo slowly understood. A protector. She nodded. He had powerful people shielding him. She looked at the government minister on the screen. And they're probably still protecting him. The trial resumed 3 days later. The courthouse was surrounded by reporters from around the world. Inside, prosecutors appeared more confident than ever. Their lead attorney smiled as cameras flashed. This case is nearly over. We expect a conviction. Meanwhile, in a secure underground parking garage beneath another government building, Amina supervised the loading of dozens of sealed steel evidence cases into armored transport vehicles. Every document had been authenticated. Every video verified. Every financial record cross-checked. Every witness statement notarized. The convoy was unlike anything the court had ever seen. Hyun-soo looked at the rows of locked containers. How many? 38. And backups. 3 complete sets. What if they try to seize them? She smiled calmly. They'll have to seize every judge in the country first. As the armored convoy rolled toward the courthouse under heavy security escort, Park Do-won received a phone call. His confident smile disappeared. What did you say? The voice on the other end answered frantically. They found the warehouse footage. Park stood so quickly his chair crashed to the floor. How much? Enough. He clenched the phone until his knuckles turned white. For the first time in 15 years, Park Do-won realized the little homeless girl he had planned to use against Kang Min-jae had become the one person capable of bringing his entire hidden empire crashing down. The armored convoy rolled through the streets of Seoul just after sunrise. 8 black security vehicles surrounded 3 reinforced evidence trucks. Police motorcycles cleared intersections ahead. Court security officers monitored every route in real time. Inside the lead vehicle, Amina sat quietly with the old blue backpack resting on her lap. She reached inside and touched the faded photograph of her parents. Then she carefully folded Kang Min-jae's letter and placed it beside the picture. Today, she whispered, all of this ends. Hyun-soo looked over from the opposite seat. Are you nervous? She smiled faintly. I've argued cases before. Not like this. No. She looked through the armored window toward the courthouse. Not like this. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The public gallery was overflowing. Journalists from around the world had traveled to witness what many believed would become the most significant organized crime trial in South Korean history. The prosecutor adjusted his tie confidently. He whispered to one of his assistants, "After today, Kang Min-jae disappears forever." Nearby, Kang Min-jae sat quietly in handcuffs. Months of imprisonment had changed him, but his eyes remained calm. He wasn't afraid for himself anymore. He was afraid for Amina. He knew the people behind this conspiracy would never stop willingly. If she failed today, they would come after her next. A court officer stepped forward. All rise. Everyone stood as the judges entered. The chief judge looked around the packed courtroom. We will now continue the proceedings. The prosecutor immediately rose. Your Honors, the prosecution has conclusively demonstrated that Kang Min-jae directed a criminal organization responsible for money laundering, murder, bribery, and illegal trafficking over several decades. He walked confidently before the judges. The defense has presented no credible evidence capable of disproving these facts. He paused dramatically. The state requests a life sentence. Silence filled the courtroom. The chief judge turned toward Kang Min-jae. Does the defense wish to respond? His exhausted lawyer slowly stood. Before he could speak, the courtroom doors burst open. The heavy wooden panels slammed against the walls with such force that everyone instinctively turned. A commanding voice echoed through the chamber. Special Judicial Evidence Unit. Dozens of armed court security officers entered first. Behind them came officials pushing massive steel evidence cases sealed with judicial authorization. 1, 2, 5, 10. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as more and more cases filled the center aisle. Reporters stopped taking notes. Even the judges leaned forward. What is the meaning of this? The prosecutor demanded. No one answered. Amina walked into the courtroom. Dressed in a tailored black suit, she moved with quiet confidence. She carried only one leather briefcase. Everything else followed behind her. 38 sealed evidence cases. Every step echoed across the silent courtroom. Kang Min-jae slowly lifted his head. Their eyes met. For just a second, the frightened little girl beneath the bridge looked back at the man who had changed her life. She smiled gently. I'm sorry I'm late. Father. His eyes filled with tears. The prosecutor slammed his hand onto the table. This is outrageous. You cannot interrupt an active trial. Amina calmly removed several official documents from her briefcase. She handed them to the chief judge. The courtroom waited. The judge examined every page carefully. Then he looked toward the bailiff. Seal every entrance. Metal locks clicked shut. No person enters. No person leaves. The prosecutor frowned. Your Honor. The judge raised his hand. The Supreme Court has authorized the submission of newly discovered evidence. A collective gasp spread across the courtroom. The prosecutor's confidence disappeared. Amina stepped toward the center of the courtroom. My name is Amina Okoye. I appear before this court as legal counsel for the defense. She looked directly at the judges. But before I defend Kang Min-jae, I must expose the crimes committed against this court. The courtroom erupted into whispers. One judge leaned forward. Explain. She nodded. For 6 months, the prosecution has relied upon evidence that combines authentic records with carefully manufactured forgeries. The prosecutor laughed. Ridiculous. She ignored him. Each forgery was designed to survive ordinary legal scrutiny. She pointed toward the steel cases. That is why this investigation required more than ordinary scrutiny. She nodded toward court officers. The first evidence case was opened. Then another. Then another. Stacks of authenticated financial records covered long evidence tables. Digital forensic experts connected encrypted hard drives to courtroom displays. Screens illuminated across the chamber. Amina continued. 38 evidence cases. 23,000 financial records. 614 authenticated witness statements. 47 hours of recovered video. 12 years of archived communications. She paused. And one conspiracy. The room became completely silent. She picked up the prosecution's primary financial ledger. You claim these transactions prove Kang Min-jae financed illegal operations. Correct, she asked. The prosecutor nodded confidently. They do. She smiled politely. Then please explain this. A forensic accountant walked to the witness stand. He projected 2 documents onto giant courtroom screens. They appear identical. They are not. He highlighted microscopic differences. The prosecution's version was altered using financial entries inserted 7 years after the original document was created. Gasps echoed through the gallery. The prosecutor quickly stood. Objection. Speculation. The accountant calmly produced laboratory reports, authenticated by 3 independent forensic laboratories. The judges examined the reports. Objection overruled. Amina didn't stop. She moved to the next exhibit. The prosecution's timeline alleges Kang Min-jae approved illegal transfers on March 18th. She looked toward the judges. At exactly 9:17 p.m. Correct. The prosecutor nodded again. Correct. Amina smiled. A technician pressed a button. The courtroom screens displayed a live charity broadcast from 15 years earlier. Kang Min-jae stood on stage delivering a nationally televised speech. The timestamp appeared clearly. 9:17 p.m. The entire courtroom looked back and forth between both screens. Amina spoke softly. So, how was my client simultaneously committing crimes in a private office, while speaking live before millions of viewers? Silence. The prosecutor searched desperately through his notes. No answer came. One by one, the evidence collapsed. Witness signatures proved forged. Audio recordings revealed digital manipulation. Bank transfers originated from accounts opened years later. Meeting minutes contained names of people who had already died before the meetings supposedly occurred. Every revelation struck harder than the last. The courtroom atmosphere shifted completely. Reporters who had spent months portraying Kang Min-jae as guilty suddenly began rewriting their headlines. The chief judge looked toward the prosecution. Do you have an explanation? The prosecutor's hands trembled. No. Then Amina opened the final evidence case. Unlike the others, it contained only a single hard drive. She held it carefully. This is why someone tried to kill me. The courtroom fell silent again. She inserted the drive. The recovered warehouse footage appeared on every screen. The judges watched without speaking. Park Do-won's younger face became visible. Then the government minister. Then the shipping executive. Finally, Kang Min-jae. The recording played. I said this shipment ends. You don't have that authority. I won't allow innocent people to die. You'll regret this. The video ended. No one moved. Amina slowly turned toward the public gallery. Her eyes stopped on one man. Park Do-won. His face had turned completely white. She raised one finger. Your Honors, the man responsible for fabricating this case is sitting in this courtroom. Every head turned toward Park. For one brief second, he froze. Then instinct took over. He bolted toward the courtroom exit. The doors wouldn't open. The bailiffs were already moving. Don't let him escape. Park shoved past one officer. Another grabbed his arm. He fought wildly. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The chief judge slammed his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order! As officers finally forced Park to the floor and placed him in handcuffs, Amina quietly walked toward him. He looked up at her with hatred burning in his eyes. You should have stayed under that bridge. She stared back without fear. No. She answered calmly. You should have remembered that the little girl you ignored grew up. The courtroom fell silent once more. But Amina wasn't finished. She turned back toward the judges. There is one final truth this court deserves to hear. She stood perfectly still. Every eye in the courtroom remained fixed on her. Even the reporters had forgotten to type. The only sound was Park Do-won's heavy breathing as he knelt in handcuffs between two court officers. Amina slowly reached into her briefcase. This case didn't begin 6 months ago. She removed a faded blue backpack. The same backpack she had carried since she was 8 years old. People in the gallery exchanged confused looks. She carefully unzipped it and removed 2 worn photographs, a broken necklace, and a folded letter. Kang Min-jae lowered his head. He already knew what she was about to reveal. She looked at the judges. 15 years ago, before I became Kang Min-jae's daughter, I was simply a little girl searching for my parents. The courtroom fell silent once again. She held up the photograph. My father was an engineer. My mother was a systems analyst. They weren't criminals. They uncovered evidence exposing an illegal trafficking network involving corrupt officials, executives, and members of an organized crime syndicate. She turned toward Park. They were silenced before they could testify. Park remained expressionless, but sweat rolled down his face. Amina continued. For 15 years, I believed my parents abandoned me. She paused. They never did. They were taken. She unfolded Kang Min-jae's handwritten letter. My adoptive father carried that guilt every single day. She handed the original letter to the judges. I request that this letter be entered into evidence. The chief judge nodded. So ordered. Amina faced the courtroom once more. The prosecution presented Kang Min-jae as the architect of a criminal conspiracy. She looked toward the evidence tables. The truth is, he tried to stop it. She nodded toward the technicians. Please play Exhibit 214. A new recording appeared. This one had never been shown before. The date matched the week Amina's parents disappeared. The video showed Kang Min-jae arguing furiously with several executives. I told you this operation ends tonight. One executive laughed. You've become sentimental. Min-jae slammed both hands onto the table. No innocent family dies because of my organization. Park's younger voice answered coldly. Then perhaps we remove the obstacle. The recording abruptly ended. The courtroom erupted. One of the associate judges leaned toward the chief judge. This changes everything. The chief judge nodded solemnly. It certainly does. The lead prosecutor slowly stood. His confidence had completely disappeared. Your honors. It appears. He swallowed. The prosecution has been misled. Amina looked directly at him. No. The prosecutor looked away. You were manipulated. There is a difference. He lowered his head. For the first time since the trial began, he looked ashamed. The chief judge addressed Park Do-won. Do you wish to respond to these allegations? Park smiled. To everyone's surprise, he began laughing. Quietly at first, then louder. Finally, he looked directly at Kang Min-jae. You still don't know. Min-jae frowned. Know what? Park's smile widened. You always believed you were chasing me. He laughed again. You were chasing ghosts. Amina stepped forward. What does that mean? Park looked at her. I'm not the head of this organization. Silence. I'm just the man who kept the seat warm. The courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Amina narrowed her eyes. Who's above you? Park said nothing. She tried again. Who ordered my parents' disappearance? He smiled. You'll never meet him. A loud voice suddenly echoed from the back of the courtroom. Oh, I think she already has. Everyone turned. An elderly man slowly stood from the public gallery. Until that moment, he had looked like an ordinary spectator. Simple gray suit, walking cane, silver hair. Court officers instinctively moved toward him. He calmly raised both hands. No need. He looked directly at Park. You've talked too much. Park's face turned white. You. The old man smiled. I warned you. Before anyone could react, a hidden pistol slipped from inside the walking cane. A single shot echoed through the courtroom. Bang. Park collapsed. People screamed. Court officers rushed forward. The elderly man calmly raised the weapon again. Another officer tackled him before he could fire. The gun slid across the courtroom floor. Chaos erupted. Judges were escorted away. Reporters ducked beneath their seats. Security officers flooded the room. Amina instinctively ran toward Kang Min-jae. She shielded him with her own body. "Father, I'm all right." Another officer shouted. "Shooters secured." The elderly man offered no resistance. Instead, he smiled. As officers handcuffed him, he looked directly at Amina. "You have your mother's eyes." Her heart stopped. "You knew my mother?" He laughed softly. "I knew both your parents." "Who are you?" "My name." He paused. "Won't matter where I'm going." He looked toward Kang Min-jae. "You should have finished this 15 years ago." Min-jae stared back. "I tried." "No." The old man shook his head. "You hesitated. And hesitation always creates survivors." Hours later, the courthouse remained under lockdown. The elderly gunman had been identified as Lee Song-ho. For decades, he had lived under a false identity. Evidence recovered from his residence linked him directly to the trafficking network. His arrest triggered emergency raids across the country. By midnight, 23 arrests had been made. 6 senior officials resigned. Millions in illegal assets were frozen. International authorities issued additional warrants. The conspiracy that had survived for 15 years collapsed within a single day. 1 week later, the chief judge returned to deliver the court's final decision. The courtroom was just as crowded as before, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The chief judge adjusted his glasses. After reviewing all newly admitted evidence, this court finds that the prosecution's central case was materially compromised by fabricated evidence. He looked directly at Kang Min-jae. "All criminal charges against Kang Min-jae are hereby dismissed." The courtroom exploded into applause. Reporters rushed for the exits to file breaking news. Hyun-soo quietly wiped away tears. Mrs. Han covered her mouth, unable to stop crying. For the first time in months, Kang Min-jae stood as a free man. He turned toward Amina. Neither spoke. Words weren't enough. He simply embraced her, just as tightly as he had held her hand outside that mansion 15 years earlier. Several weeks later, Kang Min-jae called a press conference. Business leaders, government officials, employees, journalists, thousands gathered outside Kang Group headquarters. He stepped onto the stage. Beside him stood Amina. He looked across the crowd. "For decades, I built an empire." He paused. "I convinced myself I was protecting people. But power without peace is only another prison." He took a deep breath. "Today, I officially dissolve every remaining criminal operation connected to my organization." Gasps spread through the audience. He continued. "Every legitimate company will continue operating independently. Every employee will keep their job. And every profit previously reserved for expansion will now fund scholarships for orphaned and disadvantaged children across Korea and Africa." The crowd erupted into applause. He smiled. "My greatest achievement was never this empire." He looked toward Amina. It was becoming someone's father. Amina stepped to the microphone. "When I was 8 years old, I thought kindness had disappeared from the world." She smiled through tears. "One man proved me wrong. I stand here today because he chose compassion over fear." She reached for his hand. This isn't the end of his legacy. It's the beginning of a better one. As father and daughter walked away together, the cameras kept flashing. Not because a mafia boss had escaped justice, but because a broken man had finally found redemption. And a homeless little girl had grown into the woman who saved not only his empire, but his soul. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments what you think was the most powerful moment. Was it the adoption, the courtroom reveal, or the father's final decision to change his legacy? Your support helps bring more unforgettable Afro-Korean stories like this to life. Until the next story, thank you for watching.